Richard G. Wilson received the highest military honor for his service in the Korean War. We take a look at his life and hear from his friends and family. His name has been memorialized on the Richard G. Wilson Postal Distribution Center. Unfortunately, this building has come in danger of being closed down.
It was recently announced that 140 postal distribution centers would be closed throughout the nation, many of them right here in the heartland. The Cape Girardeau facility was originally on the list of centers to be shut down. Fortunately, it dodged the bullet, but it isn't out of the line of fire yet. Despite this temporary reprieve, the possibility still exists that Cape Girardeau could lose its postal distribution facilities in the not-too-distant future. Although most people express concern at the potential loss of jobs and income to the community, there's something else of importance that would be lost if the facility closed its doors, a tribute to one of Cape Girardeau's very own. Richard G. Wilson was born in Marion, Illinois on August 19, 1931. At the age of 8, he moved to Cape Girardeau with his family, which eventually consisted of 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. Richard was an average student, but an excellent athlete. He liked to hunt, fish, ride his bicycle, and participate in a variety of sports. He played left guard on the Central High School Tigers football team, and he fought in the Golden Gloves. His combined interest in both football and boxing resulted in his early exodus from school.
He accepted a challenge from some friend, some student at Central High School, to go to a carnival that was appearing in South Cape. And it was not uncommon in the 1940s and 50s for carnivals to travel around the United States. They'd always have a big guy, tough guy, or a wrestling bear. And they would challenge people to get into the ring with the competitor. And if you could stay around with this experienced and probably tough fighter, then they would give you $25. And so Richard Wilson got into the ring with this professional, experienced boxer on the carnival circuit. And the story is that in less than a minute, Richard Wilson had that man on his back. He won the $25. That spread throughout the town and throughout the school. But the coach of the high school football team at Central High School, Lou Maggie, was an ardent supporter of rules and regulations. And in the early 1950s, late 40s and early 50s, high school coaches were very sensitive about players who had great skill accepting money for sports. So Richard Wilson was told by Coach Maggie when he discovered that Richard had accepted $25 for getting in a ring and fighting with a professional, that he could no longer play on the football team. For a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid who's trying for recognition in a small town, this is heartbreaking.
Instead of returning for his senior year of high school, he obtained his parents' permission and enlisted in the United States Army on August 19, 1948, his 17th birthday. It was peacetime, and the country's economy was booming. The military provided opportunities for training, travel, and adventure, all of which appealed to a rugged young man like Wilson.
My overriding memories would be of him coming home on leave and the spit and polish of a GI. I tell you, he was, when we dressed up, I guess he dressed up for the girls in town, right? But he sure was one of the sharpest looking troops that you could ever imagine.
After taking his basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, he went to Brooks Army Medical School at Fort Sam, Houston, Texas. For someone who liked to mix it up on the football field and in the ring, becoming a medic didn't seem to be an obvious career move for the new recruit. But according to his brother, Richard had a protective nature and would often stand up for the underdog.
While he's in med training, he and a bunch of friends of his that were in med training with him received a pass to go downtown San Antonio. They were walking the streets of San Antonio, and they walked by an alley in which they saw 5 Mexicans who had jumped a GI. And Richard walked in and had 2 of them on the ground immediately and had 3 of them running. And the guy on the ground happened to be a Native American, an Indian, and his mother wrote my mother to the effect that she felt that Richard had saved his life during that incident.
For someone who didn't care much for academics, Wilson's medical training gave him something to be passionate about, something that would have seen him return to school.
I do know at times that after he'd become a medic, that he stated that when he got out of the service, he did feel that eventually he would become a doctor.
Following his medic training, he was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to qualify as a paratrooper. He was stationed at Camp Campbell, Kentucky, when the United States went to war with North Korea in June 1950. Knowing that a tour overseas was inevitable, he asked his high school sweetheart, Yvonne Bonnie Fowler, all of 16 years old, to marry him. On August 29, 1950, they tied the knot. 3 days later, he marched alongside his fellow soldiers to be shipped off to Korea. He broke out of line to kiss his new bride goodbye.
And Sir Richard Wilson went with the 101st Airborne, and in the aftermath of General Douglas MacArthur's surprise and remarkable landing at Incheon, in support of that, the 101st Airborne, and specifically the 187th Regiment, the armored infantry, which Richard Wilson was a member of, was sent on one of the 2 largest paratroop drops in the whole Korean War. Richard Wilson landed in a valley north of Pyongyang, North Korea, and there went into military action within just hours. In this campaign against Gongju, the 187th Airborne was trying to get to the rumored American POWs.
During the battle, Wilson applied first aid to several wounded soldiers, constantly exposing himself to enemy fire in order to do so. Surrounded on 3 sides and fearful of being boxed in, Wilson's company was ordered to retreat. Having made it to safety, Wilson was checking over his patients when he learned that a fellow soldier who was initially thought to have been killed was spotted crawling towards safety. Unarmed, against the advice of his compatriots and the orders from his superiors, he headed back into the battle zone to find his fallen comrade. 2 days later, after the fighting had ceased, a patrol found Richard Wilson, who had used his own body as a shield to protect his patient while administering aid. He was still clutching a morphine syringe in his lifeless hand. Richard Wilson had died on October 21st, 1950, at the age of 19. Sergeant Major Joseph Christ, who served with Wilson and carried his body off the battlefield, recommended him for the Congressional Medal of Honor. Wilson's wife, his parents, and his 3 sisters made the trip to Washington, D.C. by train to attend a presentation ceremony at the Pentagon. On June 21, 1951, exactly 8 months after his death, Private First Class Richard G. Wilson was awarded the nation's highest honor. Although he had been honored by his fellow countrymen for sacrifice, Wilson had yet to receive a proper burial due to the fact that his remains were temporarily interred in the United Nations Military Cemetery in North Korea. In August 1955, a mutual exchange of remains between the United States and North Korea finally brought him back home.
Reverend Maynard did the speaking, and the theme he chose to speak was, "No greater love has this than a man would lay down his life for his brother." And it was really a sort of probably a tougher time as far as realizing that your brother was gone than when we actually received the telegram.
Practically the entire city of Cape Girardeau turned out to pay their respects to the local hero, who was buried in Memorial Park Cemetery with a military send-off on November 6th of 1955. A year after his burial, a memorial plaque was erected in his honor near the flagpole at Cape County Park. From the mid-1950s to the mid-1990s, half a dozen buildings were named in honor of Private Wilson: a gymnasium near Osaka, Japan, a theater in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a U.S. Army Reserve Center in Marion, Illinois, military barracks at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, the Consolidated Troop Medical Clinic at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and the Richard G. Wilson Elementary School at Fort Benning, Georgia. Despite all these tributes, it would be more than half a century after his death before his hometown followed suit.
We were contacted many years ago by Tony Carroll, who is a representative of veterans organizations up in Farmington, who actually said, told us all about Richard Wilson's story and what an amazing hero he was, and what a wonderful example he set for a Cape Girardeau native. And he said, why don't we name the new postal facility, distribution facility in Cape Girardeau after Richard Wilson? Well, it's always a little more complicated than that, and so we had to actually pass a bill in the House of Representatives, and then the Senate had a companion bill, and it passed it. Then the president signed it, after which we could finally go about setting in place the memorial to Private Wilson.
In 2004, the Richard G. Wilson Processing and Distribution Facility on Kell Farm Drive was dedicated to a man who made the ultimate sacrifice for his country and fellow countrymen.
So this is very important, and the story of Richard Wilson is known throughout the country. And the significance of closing this postal facility is really hard for so many of us to imagine, because he will then lose this very special honor that we have bestowed upon him in our community.
Hope abounds that this local tribute to a hometown hero will remain as part of the community that Richard Wilson so proudly represented on the battlefield, a representation that made him the only person from Cape Girardeau to ever receive the nation's highest military award, the Congressional Medal of Honor.